What happens when a billionaire tries to humiliate his maid, but ends up exposing his own ignorance instead? The first thing anyone noticed about the Caldwell estate that night wasn't the grand chandeliers, the imported Italian marble floors, or even the sprawling vineyards in the back. It was the energy, the kind of energy that hums when power gathers in one place. Inside the mansion, waiters in crisp uniforms glided across polished floors, carrying trays of champagne like clockwork. Laughter spilled from the main hall as million-dollar deals were sealed between bites of caviar. And then there was him, Ethan Caldwell. If arrogance had a face, it would look a lot like his. He stood near the center of the room, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a custom-tailored suit worth more than most people's annual rent. His watch alone could have paid off someone's student loans, but none of that was new. People expected Ethan to shine, to dominate the conversation, to brag about his latest investment, and tonight he didn't disappoint. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, raising his glass as a cluster of guests gathered near. "Let me tell you, when you play your cards right, you don't just win, you change the game." The group chuckled and clinked their glasses. Ethan thrived on these moments. This was his stage. Every laugh, every nod of approval fed his ego like oxygen. But while the laughter carried through the hall, someone else moved quietly in the background, Naomi Bennett. She didn't belong to this world of champagne wishes and private jets, at least not anymore. She wore a simple black maid's uniform and sensible shoes, hair pulled back neatly. Her movements were precise, careful, like someone who knew how to disappear in plain sight. No one looked twice at her. That's how she liked it. Except tonight, something felt different. She could hear snippets of conversations as she refilled glasses and cleared plates. Stocks, luxury cars, weekend trips to Aspen. None of it impressed her. Once upon a time, this was the kind of room she could walk into as a guest. Not anymore. Life had a way of flipping scripts when you least expect it. "Naomi," a voice called from the kitchen doorway. It was Marcy, the head housekeeper, waving her over. "Mr. Caldwell wants everything perfect. Double-check the wine list before dessert, okay?" Naomi nodded, offering a polite smile. "On it." As she walked back into the dining area, Ethan's laughter caught her ear again. He was talking about success, about how the right mindset separates winners from losers. His tone dripped with superiority, and for the first time that night, Naomi's jaw tightened just slightly. She didn't like arrogance. It reminded her of everything that had gone wrong in her own life. She set down a tray near the edge of the table, keeping her head low. That's when it happened. A shift so subtle, yet so sharp, it sliced through the hum of conversation like glass breaking. Ethan's gaze landed on her. He didn't just glance and look away. He stared, sizing her up the way someone might inspect an antique they weren't sure had value. His lips curled into the faintest smirk. "You," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chatter. Every head turned. Naomi froze, tray in hand. "Yes, you, come here." The room went still. Guests exchanged curious looks. Naomi stepped forward slowly, heart thudding, eyes steady but unreadable. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, his tone casual, but there was an edge to it. "Naomi," she replied softly. "Naomi," he repeated, tasting the name like it was a foreign word. Then, with a chuckle that made a few guests laugh nervously, he added, "Tell me something. Do you know what this is?" From the inside pocket of his suit, he pulled out something small and old, a folded piece of parchment, worn and yellowed with time. He held it up like a magician revealing a trick, and in that moment, Naomi's eyes flickered, just for a second, because she knew exactly what it was. But Ethan had no idea what storm he was about to unleash. The front gates of the Caldwell estate swung open every few minutes, letting in another luxury car, its headlights cutting across the manicured driveway. A valet in a sharp black suit jogged forward, opening doors and greeting guests like royalty. Inside, the chatter grew louder, the smell of roasted lamb and aged wine drifting from the dining hall. The night wasn't just a dinner party, it was a statement. Ethan didn't host often, but when he did, it was an event no one wanted to miss. The invitations had gone out to CEOs, investors, a couple of local politicians, and even a retired NBA player who now owned half the real estate in Austin. If you got an invite, it meant you mattered, or at least you had something Ethan could use. Near the marble staircase, two guests whispered like teenagers gossiping in a school hallway. "Have you seen his new Porsche parked out front?" one asked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Porsche," the other scoffed. He's got a McLaren now. That's his toy for the weekends. Their laughter blended into the room's low hum, but all the noise couldn't hide the tension that had started to form around Ethan. He moved like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, tossing compliments and backhanded jokes in equal measure. Everyone smiled, but not everyone liked him. At the far end of the table sat Victoria Langston, a woman in her 50s wearing a pearl necklace that probably had its own insurance policy. She leaned toward her friend, lowering her voice. "Ethan is brilliant, no question," she said, "but God, he loves to remind us of it." Her friend smirked. "The man thinks he invented ambition." Meanwhile, Naomi moved through this world like a shadow. She adjusted the silverware, topped off wine glasses, and disappeared before anyone really saw her. It wasn't humility. It was strategy. Naomi understood something most of these people didn't. Power was loud, but wisdom could be silent. Still, she felt their stares sometimes, not of curiosity, but dismissal. She was just the help. To them, she was invisible. And for the most part, that suited her fine. But not tonight. Tonight, she kept feeling Ethan's eyes on her like a weight. He was entertaining a group of men near the fireplace, swirling his drink as he bragged about a new tech startup he'd invested in. "This thing," Ethan said, holding his glass like a trophy, "is going to triple in value by next year. That's what I do. I see the future before anyone else." The men nodded, one of them laughing too loudly. "Man, I don't know how you do it." Ethan grinned, sharp and cold. "It's simple. Winners take risks. Losers play it safe." Naomi's steps slowed as she passed behind them with a tray. Her hands were steady, but inside, something twisted. She hated that word, losers. Life wasn't that black and white. She knew people who had worked harder than anyone in this room, only to be crushed by circumstances beyond their control. She was one of them. From the kitchen, Marcy's voice cut through her thoughts. "Naomi, dessert's almost ready. After that, we're clear." "Got it," Naomi replied, forcing a small smile. She returned to the dining hall, glancing briefly at the parchment Ethan had carelessly set on the table earlier. It looked ancient, the kind of thing you'd find in a museum, written in faded ink that most people wouldn't even recognize. Naomi's chest tightened. She knew exactly what it was. But why did Ethan have it? Before she could think any further, a burst of laughter erupted from Ethan's corner again. He slapped one of his guests on the back, eyes flashing with the thrill of being the center of attention. Then, almost casually, his gaze flicked toward Naomi, and this time, he didn't look away. He was about to make her part of his performance. But Naomi had no idea just how far he would go to embarrass her. Behind the swinging doors of the kitchen, the noise from the dining hall dulled to a low throb. Naomi set her tray down on the stainless steel counter, exhaling quietly as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. The kitchen smelled of garlic, rosemary, and butter, the kind of scents that should feel warm but didn't tonight. Marcy bustled past, her silver hair tied in a tight bun. "You good out there?" she asked without looking up, checking the dessert trays like a general inspecting troops. "Yeah," Naomi said softly, grabbing a fresh linen napkin. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't. She could still feel Ethan's stare, sharp as glass. And that parchment. Why did he have something like that? Most people wouldn't even know where to find an ancient text like that, let alone bring it out as party entertainment. Naomi smoothed the napkin with careful fingers, her mind pulling her backward, to a world that felt like another lifetime. A decade ago, she wasn't standing in anyone's kitchen, wearing a uniform and cleaning up after other people's wealth. She was sitting in lecture halls, chasing dreams with everything she had. Naomi Bennett, Fulbright scholar, linguistics major, published research at 24. She'd spoken 6 languages fluently, could read and translate 2 dead ones. Her professors had called her brilliant. They said she'd change the world someday, and for a while, she believed them. Then life happened. A family emergency that drained her savings. A medical bill that gutted her future. One domino after another until her world collapsed. She took the first job she could find, telling herself it was temporary. 1 year, maybe 2. But temporary turned into permanent, and now she was here, wiping fingerprints off crystal glasses while men like Ethan Caldwell toasted to their invincibility. Naomi glanced at the clock, almost time for dessert. The guests were loud again, laughter rolling like waves against the kitchen walls. She picked up the silver tray stacked with tiramisu squares and breathed deeply, pulling her mask of composure tight. As she walked back toward the dining hall, her thoughts sharpened like a blade. If Ethan thought for a second she was stupid, he was in for a surprise. Not that she cared about proving herself, not really. But there was a line you didn't cross, and mocking someone who works for you, that was across the line. The doors swung open, and the noise hit her like heat. Ethan was still holding court, leaning back in his chair with that effortless arrogance, laughter curling at the edges of his mouth. The parchment was gone now, tucked into his jacket pocket again, like a secret. Naomi moved around the table, setting dessert plates with quiet precision. Her eyes flicked up briefly, and sure enough, Ethan was watching her. That smirk again. "You've got steady hands," he said suddenly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet you've done this 1,000 times, huh?" The guests chuckled politely. Naomi didn't answer. She just kept working, her movements calm, almost graceful. "Oh, come on," Ethan pressed, the corners of his mouth lifting higher. "Don't be shy. You're the star of the show right now." A few people exchanged looks, sensing where this was going. Naomi straightened slowly, the tray still in her hand. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching. "Is there something you need, sir?" she asked, her tone neutral. Ethan's grin widened. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the parchment like it was a magic trick. "Actually, yeah," he said, holding it up for everyone to see. "Tell me, Naomi, think you can make sense of this?" The room stirred with laughter and curiosity. Naomi's stomach tightened, but her face didn't move. She knew exactly what that document said, but no one in that room was ready for what would happen next. The parchment looked fragile in Ethan's hands, its edges frayed like it had traveled through time to land in this very moment. A few guests leaned forward, eyes glittering with curiosity. "What is that?" someone asked, a tech CEO in an overpriced silk tie. Ethan chuckled, tapping the folded sheet against his palm. "This," he said, "is history. Picked it up during a trip to Istanbul. Supposedly, it's written in an ancient dialect. Rare stuff. Even museums fight to get their hands on something like this." The room murmured with interest. A woman in a red dress gasped dramatically. "Wow, that must be worth a fortune." Ethan grinned. "Oh, it's priceless. At least to most people." His eyes flicked toward Naomi, who stood perfectly still, tray balanced on her hand like a shield. He let the pause hang, savoring it like fine wine. "Tell you what," he continued, voice smooth and loud enough to draw every ear in the room. "If Naomi here can translate this, I'll give her—" He tilted his head, pretending to calculate. "My entire annual salary." A ripple of laughter swept through the guests like wind through leaves. Someone whistled. Another clapped their hands. Naomi didn't flinch. Marcy, standing near the door, froze mid-step, her mouth opening in shock. "Mr. Caldwell," she started, but he held up a hand, silencing her. "Relax, Marcy," Ethan said, grinning wider. "We're just having a little fun." Naomi set the tray down on a side table with deliberate care, her fingers steady. Her mind, though, was racing. Ancient text, Istanbul, and him thinking she couldn't even read it? That was the part that stung, not because he doubted her, but because he assumed she was too small to know anything beyond scrubbing floors. "What do you say, Naomi?" Ethan asked, raising a brow. "You game?" All eyes turned to her. Some looked amused, others uncomfortable. Nobody expected her to say yes. Nobody expected her to do anything but laugh nervously and walk away. Naomi straightened, smoothing her apron like she had all the time in the world. Then she walked slowly toward Ethan, her steps measured, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. When she stopped in front of him, their eyes locked. "Your entire annual salary?" she repeated, her tone calm, almost casual. Ethan chuckled. "You heard me, all of it. Every last dollar." She tilted her head slightly, her face unreadable. "Hope you're not bluffing." The room erupted in low laughter, a few people exchanging wide-eyed glances. The vibe shifted just a little. Ethan's grin tightened, but he kept his composure. "Not a chance. Here." He unfolded the parchment carefully and handed it to her like a teacher giving homework to a student he knew would fail. The paper felt brittle under her fingers, the faded ink curling in ancient loops. She didn't need more than 2 seconds to recognize the language. Old Aramaic. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from something else, a mix of pride and pain. Memories of late nights hunched over texts just like this, fueled by coffee and ambition, flashed in her mind like ghosts. Naomi lifted her eyes slowly, the silence in the room pressing down like a weight. "Do you really want me to read this out loud?" she asked softly. The question was a knife wrapped in silk. Ethan laughed, a little too loudly this time. "Yes, Naomi. Impress us." A few guests smirked. One whispered, "This is going to be awkward." Naomi's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. She lowered her gaze back to the parchment and began to read, her voice smooth and steady, each word rolling out in perfect cadence, flawless in pronunciation. The laughter died instantly. Chairs creaked as people leaned in, jaws slack. When she finished the first line, she paused, then translated effortlessly into English. It says, "Wisdom belongs not to those who boast of their riches, but to those who seek understanding." The silence was a living thing now. Ethan's smile faltered, his jaw tightening just enough for Naomi to notice. She handed the parchment back, her expression calm as still water. "Anything else you'd like me to translate?" But the real shock wasn't what she said. It was what Ethan realized in that moment about the woman standing in front of him. The room was so silent you could hear the faint clink of ice settling in someone's glass. Every smirk, every chuckle that had filled the air moments ago evaporated, leaving behind something heavier, curiosity laced with disbelief. Naomi didn't look around. She didn't need to. She could feel their eyes drilling into her like heat lamps, scanning her face for cracks, for some sign that what they'd just witnessed wasn't real. But it was real. Every syllable, every perfectly pronounced word had shattered the illusion Ethan had built for this moment. Ethan stood frozen for half a breath before forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the stillness. "Impressive," he said finally, adjusting his cufflinks like he needed something to do with his hands. "You've got quite the party trick there." Party trick. That was his way of clawing back control, of making it small. Naomi simply tilted her head slightly. "It's not a trick," she said, voice low but strong enough to cut through the room. A woman near the center of the table let out a soft, almost theatrical gasp. Someone whispered, "What language was that?" Naomi answered before Ethan could. "Aramaic, one of the oldest written languages, still used in some parts of the Middle East." The guests stared at her as if she'd grown wings. For a moment, even the clinking glasses stopped. Ethan cleared his throat. "So, you've got a hobby for old books?" He forced a smile, but the edge in his voice betrayed him. Naomi's eyes stayed locked on his, calm, unshaken. "I used to teach," she said simply. That landed like a brick in a glass room. Several guests exchanged startled looks. A former teacher? Here, carrying trays and clearing plates? "What did you teach?" one man asked from the far end of the table, curiosity dripping from his voice. "Linguistics," Naomi replied. "At a university." The ripple of murmurs grew louder, spreading across the table like wildfire. Even the retired NBA player raised his brows and muttered, "No way." Ethan's jaw tightened. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. He'd wanted a laugh, a little moment of superiority to impress his friends. Instead, the spotlight had shifted onto her. "Well," Ethan said, trying to recover, "seems like I underestimated you." His tone was light, but his eyes had lost their shine. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just looked at him and said, "You did." The simplicity of it made the words hit harder. The woman in the red dress leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "So why are you here? Working as—" She trailed off, realizing the question sounded cruel. Naomi set the parchment gently on the table, her movements graceful, almost regal. "Life isn't always what you plan," she said quietly. "Sometimes you take jobs you never imagined, because survival doesn't wait for pride." Her words weren't bitter. They were factual, honest, and that honesty had held more weight than anything Ethan had bragged about all evening. The silence stretched again, thick and awkward. A few guests glanced at Ethan, wondering what he'd say next. This was his moment to redeem himself, or dig a deeper hole. Ethan forced a chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, Naomi, looks like you've earned more than dessert tonight." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "Guess I'll need to call my accountant." "What was that?" My entire annual salary? He laughed again, but the sound fell flat. Naomi shook her head slightly. Keep your money, she said softly. Ethan blinked. Excuse me? I wasn't doing it for the money, she said, her tone calm, almost gentle. You wanted to test me. I answered, that's all. For the first time all night, Ethan had no comeback. He stood there, phone still in hand, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Around them, the guests shifted in their seats, their earlier amusement replaced with something else. Respect, maybe even admiration. The power dynamic in the room had flipped, and everyone could feel it. Naomi picked up the empty tray and turned toward the kitchen, her back straight, her steps steady. But what no one knew, not even Ethan, was that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The party never fully recovered. Oh, people tried. They laughed a little louder, drank a little faster, but the energy wasn't the same. The room that once pulsed with confidence now felt fractured, like everyone was walking on eggshells, waiting to see what Ethan would do next. Ethan Caldwell, the man who owned the night, stood near the fireplace nursing his whiskey like it could wash the humiliation from his throat. He kept glancing toward the kitchen, but Naomi didn't reappear. Every time someone tried to spark conversation, he'd nod, force a smile, and retreat back into his thoughts. Victoria Langston, the pearl necklace woman, finally broke the awkward silence at her end of the table. She's extraordinary, she whispered to her friend. Imagine wasting talent like that in a job like this. The friend shrugged, voice low. Ethan's ego just got steamrolled. Can't say I'm sorry. On the other side of the room, Marcy hovered near the doorway, her expression tight. She'd worked for wealthy families long enough to know what happened when employers felt small in their own homes. She prayed Ethan wouldn't take it out on Naomi. But Naomi wasn't praying. She was standing alone in the pantry, her back against the cool tile, her hands resting on the edge of a counter. For the first time all night, she let her mask slip. Not fear, not regret, just exhaustion. She closed her eyes and let the memories come, the ones she kept locked away like fragile antiques she couldn't afford to break. The lecture hall filled with students scribbling notes, the sound of chalk against a board, her own voice explaining syntax shifts in ancient languages. She'd been good at it. No, better than good. She'd been passionate. And then the phone call, her mother's voice cracking as she said the words, "It's your brother. He's in the hospital." The diagnosis, the bills, the endless nights doing calculations that never added up, one decision after another, each one pulling her further from the life she built until she was here, polishing silver for a man who thought intellect came with a price tag. A sound pulled her back, a sharp click of leather shoes on tile. She opened her eyes. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Naomi," he said. She straightened instantly, her face sliding back into that calm mask. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell?" He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. For a second, neither spoke. The air felt heavier than before, thick with something unspoken. "You embarrassed me," Ethan said finally, his voice low, not angry, just blunt. Naomi met his eyes. "That wasn't my intention." "Wasn't it?" His tone sharpened. "You could have just said no. Instead, whatever that was, you made me look like a fool in front of people who matter." She took a slow breath. "You did that yourself." His jaw twitched. He wasn't used to being talked to like this, not by employees, not by anyone. "You think you're clever?" "No," Naomi said evenly. "I think you underestimated someone you didn't bother to know." The words landed like stones in water, rippling through the silence. For a moment, Ethan looked like he wanted to fire her on the spot. But something in her eyes stopped him, something he couldn't name. "What's your story, Naomi?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. "Why are you here? Someone like you?" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely, as if words failed him. "Shouldn't be carrying trays." Naomi hesitated, then spoke. "Life happened. That's all." "Life," he echoed. "That's your answer?" She set her jaw. "Sometimes the world takes more than you can give, and you do what you have to, not what you want to." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like the weight of those words was sinking into him. "You could have taken my money," he said finally. I didn't need it, she replied softly. Something shifted in his face then. Not quite shame, not quite admiration, but something close to both. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, stepping back toward the door. Before he left, he said quietly, I think I owe you an apology. Naomi didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just gave a small nod. The door closed behind him, and for the first time that night, the silence felt almost peaceful. But what Ethan didn't know was that Naomi's story wasn't just about survival. It was about strength he couldn't begin to understand. And that lesson was coming, whether he was ready or not. By the time the last guest's car disappeared beyond the iron gates, the Caldwell estate was quiet again. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the undercurrent of tension, all of it was gone, leaving only the echo of a night that hadn't gone as planned. Naomi finished wiping down the last polished counter in the kitchen. She could have slipped out without a word, taken the bus back to her small apartment, and pretended tonight never happened. But something told her the night wasn't over yet. Sure enough, when she stepped into the main hall, Ethan was there, standing by the grand piano, his tie loosened, a glass of something amber in his hand. He didn't look like the man who owned the room earlier. He looked smaller. Thought you'd left, he said, his voice quieter now. Almost, Naomi replied, her tone steady. Ethan set the glass down, running a hand through his hair, like he needed to buy time. You ever have one of those nights where you realize you're not as smart as you thought? Naomi raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He laughed under his breath. I've been in boardrooms with billionaires, Naomi. I've stared down people who would eat you alive if you showed weakness. And somehow, tonight, one sentence from you hit harder than all of that. She folded her arms lightly. It wasn't about making you feel small, Ethan. It was about respect. His eyes lifted to hers, and for once there was no arrogance in them, just honesty. I deserve that. He hesitated, then added, I don't say this often, but I'm sorry. Naomi didn't soften immediately. Apologies were easy. Change was harder. Still, something in his tone told her this wasn't just lip service. You ever wonder why people like me end up in jobs like this? She asked suddenly. Ethan frowned. Yeah, I've been wondering that all night. Naomi took a slow breath, her voice low but firm. Because sometimes, life doesn't care about your degrees or your dreams. It takes everything you built and burns it down. And when that happens, you work with what's left. Because quitting isn't an option. Ethan stared at her, silent, letting the weight of those words settle. Then, quietly, he said, You're stronger than most people I know. Naomi gave a faint, almost tired smile. Strength doesn't feel like strength when you're just trying to survive. For a long moment, they just stood there. Two people from different worlds, connected by something raw and real. Finally, Ethan said, I'd like to help. Not as charity. Don't look at me like that. I mean, you deserve more than this. If you ever want an introduction, a position, anything, my door's open. Naomi considered him for a beat, then shook her head gently. Thank you, but this isn't about favors. It's about remembering that everyone you meet has a story you know nothing about, including the people serving your wine. Ethan nodded slowly, and in that nod, Naomi knew he understood, maybe for the first time in his life, that wealth and status don't define worth. As she walked out into the cool night, the weight on her chest felt lighter than it had in years. Never underestimate someone because of their job, their clothes, or where life has placed them. People carry entire worlds behind their eyes, stories of brilliance, heartbreak, and resilience you can't even imagine. Respect isn't optional. It's the bare minimum. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Success doesn't make you better, it just makes you louder. True strength? It's in humility, respect, and how you treat people when no one's watching.